Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi.
All signs point to an improving housing market nationally, but the picture isn't as rosy here in Rhode Island. One sign of hope, single-family home sales rose 8% in September. But the bigger picture remains worrying. New construction is at a historic low, while prices are too high for many families. Housing advocates say Question 7 on this year's ballot would help by subsidizing more affordable homes in Rhode Island. But is it just a Band-Aid for a housing system that's fundamentally broken? Our guests this week on Executive Suite, Nellie Gorbea, Executive Director of Housing Works RI, and John Marcantonio, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Builders Association. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Nellie, John, thanks for being here with me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ted.
So before we talk about Question 7 and the bond that's up, we'll get to that. I want to just start by talking about the housing market generally and around. As I mentioned in the opening, we saw an 8% uptick in sales year over year. The realtors reported just in the last few days. But at the same time, there are plenty of signs that are a bit worrying. John, I'll start with you. Sure. Where do you see the housing market in Rhode Island right now?
As far as new home construction, Ted, over the last decade, for instance, around 2000, we were building around 2,600 houses units per year. Around 2007, when the recession hit, which for our industry was a depression, it dropped to 700, and in the last couple of years down to around 575. And about 60% of that market was a subsidized market. So what's happening in 2012?
Market-based new homes is at a very few.
It's very, very few. Actually, this year we're still around 600 units per year. What's happened is the builders can't build to a market price. The cost structure is so high in the state that we're having an awful time doing that.
And Nellie, same question to you. Where do you see the overall housing market in Rhode Island right now?
Well, we see it as very problematic because basically the builders can't build, but then whatever is in the market is still very unaffordable to many of Rhode Island's workers and lower income families. And so, there are a number of people who need a home that are priced out, whether that be an elderly couple on a fixed income, your veterans coming back from the front, or basically families with children. The median household income in the state last year was good enough to only be able to buy a home in about 6 communities throughout the state. And then the picture for renters is even worse.
Speak to renters then. There's a lot. I rent myself. What's the story for apartment dwellers?
Yeah, the story for apartment dwellers is particularly bleak. We found out that looking at the data last year that only that 27% of Rhode Island households are actually spending more than basically 50% of their income on housing.
Yeah, that stat was striking. Yeah. Half their income going to their housing costs for these families.
Mm-hmm. And this is really, really quite troubling because these are people who can't afford to buy a home, are not going to possibly ever, at this point of their lives, buy a home, but we still need them in the economy. Your entry-level workers, your young people. We talk about a knowledge economy, wanting to keep all those young people in the state. And those people are not going to be staying if they can't afford to live here.
Now, John, I want to turn back to you. Obviously, the housing market's not booming. There's not a lot of building going on, and sales are not that significant even of existing homes. Isn't that just the market sending us a signal saying people don't want to buy houses right now at the prices they're at?
Well, I mean, there's certainly some of that going on, but it's kind of been a perfect storm for the industry. Going back, I said, to the turn of the century when we were building around 2,500 houses a year, what was happening during the last decade was you had that real estate boom in Rhode Island, but you didn't have a building boom. So even during the best economic times to build something, the number of units in the state continued to decline. And a lot of that wasn't because there wasn't a demand for new housing, because the industry has been handicapped in its ability to meet or build a supply.
And we're going to talk more about regulations, but that's an important point for people to understand. When you look at the numbers, and I think your numbers show this too, Nellie, we did have a housing bubble, I would say, in prices in Rhode Island, but we never had the huge spike in, you think of the outskirts of Nevada, where you see tons and tons of unoccupied homes that were built. We don't have that in Rhode Island.
Yeah, and in fact, the foreclosure crisis in the U.S. is very much a geographically different foreclosure crisis. So you've got places like Las Vegas or Atlanta where they overbuilt, and then you have the coasts where not a lot of that was happening for a number of reasons that John can actually talk to as well. And that has really been a very difficult thing for people in the market to really be able to go out there and afford a reasonable home.
Why can't this be corrected by the market? You know, we're going to get to the bond in the next segment, but you know, the part of the reason for the bond is the idea that the structure of cost to build a new home is just not one that goes to a price that most families can afford or are willing to pay. First, we'll start with you, Nellie, because we know to a extent how the builders feel. Why do you see that? Why is that the case? Why haven't prices reset to a level that they sell at?
Part of the challenge is incomes. Incomes during the last 10 years really were quite stagnant, and then you compounded with the unemployment, and that's just made matters worse. So we have a real crisis here where the real estate prices went up significantly during the boom, and yet income stayed flat. People started getting into subprime lending and ways to be able to afford a place, and then the whole market crashed, and they were basically, we have market failure. So, and I think in terms of housing in this country, we have a market failure, and that's when government comes in and says, okay, how can we make this work because people need homes? And
your numbers here show, this is the fact book that Housing Works RI puts out. It's on your website.
Yep.
I think people can get it for free, maybe not a printed one, which is very nice as well. But since 2001 to 2011, single-family homes still up 25%, the price from $156,000 to $195,000, despite years of price declines now since the boom. I mean, I think it topped out at $285,000, but we're still significantly up from a decade ago.
Definitely, and that's what people don't realize, because a lot of what they hear in the media is, oh, real estate prices are coming down, they're coming down, they're coming down. What they don't realize is they went up so much that even with all the declines, it's still out of reach. And that's for the home ownership piece. We have then, again, the renter issue is one that's particularly troubling. And we have, you know, a really serious problem there. We have about 90,000 renter households out in our state who are not able to afford the two-bedroom apartment rent that's out there.
And John, Nellie mentioned government coming in the sense of helping with the affordable housing bond, but of course I think at least some of your members would argue government created the problem it's now trying to solve, as well as the voters who put those governments in place and support policies, right? That's why the builders say it's so hard here.
Well, one of the reasons it's hard here is that you have a lot of the communities just don't want growth. And when I say that, it's because of local regulation that the cost structures are so high.
And when we're talking local regulation, what do you mean for people who might not have ever built a house?
Well, to put it in some sort of context, in a low-regulated state, the average cost from the National Association of a house that's due to regulation is around 14%. In a highly regulated state, like Rhode Island is, if it's not the most, it's pretty close to it. It can be up to 36% of the total cost of the house. So you put that into a Rhode Island environment that's very regulated, and you're going to end up with very expensive cost structures. And if the market price is here and the cost structure is here, which is what's happening right now, the industry itself is underwater. It can't build to a market price. There'll be no additional supply. Right now, the two markets that exist are the high end and the subsidized. Your traditional market that's in the middle, where people would be buying up or moving into, it's just not, it's very stagnant.
And so for, if people look at what's going on with building those houses, is it that they've said you can't build enough density? Is it about, how big the sewer pipe is? What is it all that?
It's a combination of lots of things. First, you're looking at land development policies. All right, density certainly is not there. The infrastructure is not there. There's a lot of restrictions on what can and can't happen with a piece of land in the state of Rhode Island that doesn't exist in other places. And it's not necessarily the size of the state, it's the culture of the state. And a lot of communities look at new residential growth or apartments as new kids that they have to put in their school systems. And of course, the correlation to the funding mechanisms in the state for education is a big factor in that.
All right, we're going to talk more about that and of course get to the housing bond that both of you have stickers for we're on today. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Our guests this week are Nellie Gorbea, Executive Director of Housing Works RI, and John Marcantonio. He's Executive Director, pretty new Executive Director, right, of the Rhode Island Builders Association. I want to go back to what we were talking about, John, and have both of you weigh in on this. I was reading some of the criticism of some of the bills the Builders Association has put forward to, for example, make the zoning rules more uniform. And the Hopkinton Town Council president told the Westerly Sun, this will promote sprawl, disregard local zoning and comprehensive plans, cram more houses on smaller lots, and pollute our drinking water. If passed, the only winners will be big developers' bank accounts. You hear that kind of criticism a lot.
And it's just, it's outlandish and it's really not fair. but one of the things I'm trying to do as the new executive director is start to have those communications between towns and the industry. I mean, for far too long, the industry and local communities have been like this, and we have to break down these barriers and start to work together on these things. The industry itself has been trying to work with the General Assembly to get relief from the local communities. In my own town of Hopkinton, okay, and I've never met my council president, I can tell you that they just don't like to see growth, and a lot of it has to do with the education system, the Chariot Hole School District. And I pay $7,000 on a 2,000 square foot house in that town, and a lot of people see as kids come into the community as higher taxes. I disagree with the accounting on that, but if that's the fundamental reason as to why communities don't want growth, we have to work together to solve that. All of us do, because if you don't have growth in a community, they die.
Nellie, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't disagree with John, actually. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that the builders are proposing, as long as they're bringing back a market element, we do need a healthy housing market in the state. Now, I think both John and I agree that you also will always need an affordable housing component to that marketplace. There will always be people who either are coming out of homelessness or are permanently disabled, entry-level workers, people like that. Would I like to see more affordable building costs so that we could come to a happy medium? I agree with that.
And let's good segue there. Let's talk about question 7 on the ballot. Voters will be faced with it in less than 2 weeks now. It would allow the state to borrow $25 million to subsidize 600 new and refurbished affordable housing units over the next 2 years. In exchange, prices would be set at an affordable level for at least 3 decades. First, is that right?
That is correct.
That's the right summation of it.
So right.
What's your case for it?
Well, we need more affordable homes here in the state. The builders need the opportunity to be able to build. You had a number that you said recently at a meeting that we were both at, that 98% of the businesses that are helping build these new homes are actually local Rhode Island businesses. It's actually economic development in the short run at a time when the industry critically needs it. And we have a very strong demand that's out there for affordable housing. It's also going to help us address a key problem in the state, which is foreclosures. We have a number of foreclosed and abandoned properties throughout the state. So you're not talking about building new structures or sprawl in that case. You're talking about rehabilitating, investing in existing infrastructure to put it back on the tax rolls and to make this economy work again.
But of course, I can hear a taxpayer homeowner in my ear right now saying, why are we borrowing money and paying it back with interest as state taxpayers? I already have a home, to subsidize the cost of a home for somebody else.
Well, actually, in this particular case, we actually, in this particular yearbook, fact book on housing, we actually looked at how having affordable housing actually contributes to our investments in education and healthcare. There are a number of ways in which safe, affordable housing has a positive impact in our communities. And I would say to that taxpayer, our communities will be stronger, our kids will be better able to do well in school, and it's actually a great investment. It's an investment in infrastructure. And sometimes people don't see affordable housing as that, but it is. It's an investment in the infrastructure of our state.
Who decides, one of the questions here is affordable. It sounds good. What isn't, how do we decide if a house isn't affordable, and who gets to buy it? Who writes those rules?
All right, so those are state rules, and there's a basically the rule is the 30%. You should not be spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs. If you're spending more than 30%, then it's unaffordable. If you're spending 30% or less, it's affordable. And that's actually a calculation that's done in state law. The people who are eligible, it depends on an area's median income, and it's actually quite complicated for development. But basically, these are open to a number of people. And if you have any questions, you can always go to either the Rhode Island Housing Help Center, or you can go to one of the community development corporations, one of the nonprofit developers, and they're happy to sort of put you through the process to figure out whether you're eligible.
John, the last housing bond voters approved was $50 million in 2006. What impact did that have on the builders, and why are you behind this one?
If it wasn't for that bond, the 20% unemployment rate, which is pretty much the state's number for our industry.
20% unemployment in the construction industry.
Yeah, which is a big variable relative to the 11 or 10% we're at now. The industry almost wouldn't exist. I mean, if it wasn't for that bond and the activity that it created within the industry, the numbers would be even worse than they are now. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, this part of the market used to always represent maybe 10, 15% of the total market, and now it's representing 60% of the total activity within the market.
It sounds like part of the case to voters and taxpayers is, John, you can have your very heavy zoning regulations, but that means you either give up having any new housing that's affordable, or you have to sort of subsidize it this way. It's sort of, the policies in the end are all going to affect each other.
In general, I mean, why do you need a bond like this? You need it because in order to have affordable housing, you have to have affordable building. And one of the problems we have with the cities and towns is that they put so much cost into it that building to a market price is near impossible. So you sense and you see regulation on a local level, and you try to put some relief into it through the General Assembly, and you're looking at 39 states basically within a state is what you got here, 36. You're looking at each one having their own wetlands laws, their own wastewater laws, their own setbacks, some of them requiring the entire land to be completely dry, some requiring no slope. I mean, it's almost like what's left isn't the plans that are in place in the local communities. They're not buildable plans. They look good on paper, but the cost structures associated with them can't be built.
And you agree with that now?
No, well, I think that I think what John is saying is that we really need to look at things, and I think there is room for improvement. I think that the way the builders are doing it in terms of trying to have a dialogue with the communities, this is a problem that we all need to address. This is not an us versus them. This is communities coming together to address it. We need affordable apartments throughout our state. That's a really big challenge here in Rhode Island. And I think that the bond is going to help. I mean, last bond that the voters passed in 2006, overwhelmingly, I should say. In fact, it was 66% of voters supported it. And we were hoping that they'll all go out there and their friends as well on November 6th to support it. But about 60% of that went to rehabilitate foreclosed and abandoned properties. Again, it's putting economic activity into a place that really needs it.
John, we're up against break, but weigh in real quick.
Sure. I mean, I governed North Smithfield for 7 years as a council person, so I get what's going on a local level. I really do. The two things that fundamentally have to change in the state to get the industry and the local communities to work together so that residential stuff isn't a problem. Infrastructure right now is all put on the town. So sewer and water to get density, to get the concentrations and growth you want, it's a local expense. It's too high. Second is the education funding. 80% of local budgets are school funding in some of the rural communities, and it's just way too high. Property tax is too high. They see kid as the enemy, and you have that scenario, you're not going to have residential growth.
All right, we have to take another break. When we come back, more on housing and maybe a brief dip into politics with Nellie, who knows a little bit about that. Stick with us here on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. A lively discussion today about housing with Housing Works RI's Nellie Gorbea and the Rhode Island Builders Association's John Marcantonio. Nellie, we were just talking off air about Massachusetts and Connecticut, I believe, also include money in their budget just out of regular year-to-year revenue to work on affordable housing, and we do not, right?
We do not. We do not have a dedicated funding stream for affordable housing development, which is something that, yes, Connecticut and Massachusetts both have. They have the bonding, which is good for capital construction, and then they have the ongoing revenue streams that help subsidize either the rents or operating expenses of these kinds of developments. And that's key because, we compare ourselves to Connecticut and Massachusetts all the time for the sales tax, for the programs, for the education. Let's compare ourselves for affordable housing as well. And you'll see a very proactive, strong stance. Governor Malloy in Connecticut has been putting in $500 million over 10 years, to really sort of make a dent in the affordable housing area in that state. And I think it speaks to housing is an infrastructure issue. It is part of what government needs to invest in order to have a vibrant and healthy economy.
John, there's a lot of talk lately among the younger economic writers I read about housing policy. They think it's more important than most Americans realize in the entire structure of the American economy, and that would hold for Rhode Island too. And one thing I've gotten out of reading them is that in a place like Rhode Island, where land is very valuable and at a premium because we're such a small state, we probably should be building up instead of out, right? There's not a ton of room left to put houses. Do you think that's part of the answer, and can we?
Well, eventually we're going to have to have a desalination plant too. The water resources are going to have to improve. Infrastructure is going to have to improve. In order to do what you're speaking of, you have to have infrastructure in place. And the infrastructure plan in the state of Rhode Island is very poor. It's not very well thought out. It's antiquated. It's from the 70s in a lot of ways. And I've spoken to the governor's office about this and a lot of leaders, and they're actually looking at it for the first time in a bigger way. Not that no one's looked at it before, but actually trying to see this as a way to have some growth and protecting the environment in the process.
And Nellie, you're a big advocate of apartments, I assume, as part of this.
Those haven't been built in a long time either.
If you look at, again, 60% of the last bond issue went to rehabilitate abandoned and foreclosed buildings. A lot of those are triple deckers. If you look at some of the investment that was done with the last bond cycle, it's fascinating. There's whole areas of Olneyville and Woonsocket and Smith Hill that are completely different neighborhoods today, thanks to the development of affordable homes. I think that was one of the key accomplishments of the last bond issue. The other accomplishment was that there was 1,300 homes built in 30 communities. So you really had a very well distributed project. The process is transparent, it's accountable, it's a great program. So people talk about, well, government not being able to do anything right. This is one area where actually it really was done right.
Now, one thing, it goes against your message a little. I noticed in the fact book, 2011, the average two-bedroom rent in Rhode Island was $11.54, and affordable was $11.50. Sounds to me like we're right in the we're perfect. Why do we do anything?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of, that's why we do a whole fact book on housing. So we look at it from different angles, because no one number gives you the whole story.
What's wrong with that number in your view?
So what's wrong with that number is that takes sort of a statewide view. And so if you look at various communities, that number varies a lot. And so I think that when you look at, so the state, you need to look at it on a statewide basis, but looking at areas where you might have a need where for example, if you look at a Barrington and what an apartment might go for there versus what people can afford in that community that are entry-level workers, that's going to be completely out of whack. That will speak completely differently than the overall number.
Does that include Central Falls, places hard hit with very low costs?
Yeah, sure.
John, are there any cities or towns that are doing particularly well from the viewpoint of the Builders Association? They have a good plan in place, or there's a more collegial atmosphere? Or is it across the state a problem?
Yeah, like I said, it's just a matter of reaching out and communication in a lot of ways. I think a lot of planners would like to see their plan be built. But like I said, the cost structure that's involved in that plan, planners don't take into account when they actually put these things together. So it's a matter of us communicating that to them and actually working with them and try to bring infrastructure, solve the school funding issues. I mean, these are strange issues for industries to come together with communities on, okay? But if we do come together on this, I think you could see some major differences in the state in the years to come.
And do you see any movement on that?
I do. The folks I've reached out to, the communities I've spoken to, and like I said, I come from that government side a little bit, having been a counselor in North Smithfield. They're open to the discussion. But instead of us battling each other up at the State House every year, us from relief from them and them from relief from the state on education funding, this is all tied together. We're all tied together as a state. We have to work together to solve this problem, because I don't want my 3-year-old having to leave the state because he can't find a place to rent or live in, or heaven forbid, build something.
Probably should just let him live with you when he's 3.
That's what's going to happen, right?
I think if you, I mean, I think there's,
I'm kidding.
I think there's some communities that were really able to maximize the use of these monies last time around. And for example, you take a place like Burrillville. They've done some really neat developments over there and have used the bond funding to leverage other infrastructure projects around it. North Kingstown has done some really good work. North Smithfield, actually. So these are communities that have inched up in terms of the number of affordable homes, and I think it's what you're talking about. We have to get together and talk.
Well, the thing you talked about earlier about the economic side of it. I mean, Eldonado Tabaldi at Bryant University and some other professors have talked about this. Rhode Island came out of its recessions in previous years because of the construction trade, because of residential growth, because of all that. It's not happening this time. You create one job in our industry, you create one in another. That exponential effect is not taking place in our state. And it's starting to happen in other states. It's not happening here. It won't happen here until we have this discussion and actually do something to lower the cost burden on the industry.
Is it a New England thing, though?
It's more New England than it is other areas, but it's specifically more Rhode Island than it is New England.
And a key solution to all of this, in the meantime, while we solve and talk and do a lot of these things, is to actually have monies available for communities to apply for the developers to apply for in terms of question 7, the $25 million for affordable housing.
She gets her pitch in just before we go to our final commercial break. Good job there. I want to thank my guests. That's all the time we have this week. Nellie and John, thanks for being here. And you can catch every episode of Executive Suite on WPRI.com. See you next week.